We should be the main screen. Beautiful. All right. Let me just duck in here.
There she is.
Woohoo! There we go. I was hiding in the background there, but we're all to it. So, welcome everybody to our Zoom session and our Instagram Live. We want to thank you so much for joining us. Pretty much everybody on the Zoom session has the cheese and wine matching pack. So Nardia, I think, did some deliveries this week.
I did.
Yes, some personal deliveries. Yeah. As well as Mum and Dad. Mark and I weren't there, but Mum and Dad did some deliveries as well, and that was just to make sure that the cheeses were as fresh as they could be. So we did some hand deliveries. So tonight obviously is going to be our wine and cheese matching night. For the neighbours that haven't met us, that are joining us tonight, my name's Jodie Marsh. I run my family's wine business out of Heathcote in central Victoria. Beside me here is my brother Mark, so he is Sanguine's winemaker. And on the other side of me here is Nardia, and she is the Chinese. The cheese artisan coming out of Goldfields Farmhouse Cheese. So tonight obviously is about cheese and wine matching. We can, no doubt you would have sort of set yourselves up with plates and cheeses. Mark and Nardia will talk you through the cheese that matches the wine. For those of you that have the wine save canisters that were delivered with your wines, please make sure that you add the gas to the wine straight after pouring them and put the top back on. The argon gas is food safe, so very safe for you. And those wines just go into the fridge, including your red wines, and they will last several weeks. So you don't feel like you have to overindulge tonight and drink every single or every drop of every single bottle, because there are 4. But that will preserve the wine for a couple of weeks, so you'll be able to enjoy those wines later on. So without any further ado, I shall hand you over to Mark and Nardia to start the cheese and wine matching class, and I will be in the background there taking people's comments and letting them know what you're saying so that we can, you can participate.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, I'll see you a bit later, everybody.
Well, welcome everybody. I was having a chat to Nardia earlier on, and we were sort of trying to rack our brains about how many times we've actually done this cheese and wine pairing. We can go back about 5 years and at least 10 sessions. So this is our second on live tasting this time around.
Yes, the last time was only an hour ago.
Yeah, it was only an hour ago. So we feel like we've got a relatively good handle on which cheese goes with which wine. Now it seems to be something that does vary a little bit each year. But there's a sort of an interesting symmetry between winemaking and cheese making, because it's our raw ingredient which really dictates the end product. I've got a little bit more control over it as I go through than Nardia, but it's very similar because the climatic conditions, what the cows are eating, the environment that's affecting the grapevines, they both affect that end product. And we're both at the whims of nature with making. And I think that's why there's a symmetry also in tasting cheese and wine. And there's definitely some good matches. And I think 2 of the cheese and wine matches that we have in our lineup, we've had from the very beginning. So I think the very first one is the only one that's been in every single session. So we know it works for sure. So how we're going to do this is that some of you who have got the packs, you'll have a little placemat as well that will tell you which cheese is with which wine. Obviously, those who haven't, I'll tell you as we're going. So we're starting off with the 2019 Chardonnay. That is with the Bunignon Mist. Then we've got the Rosé with the Warren Heap Ash. And then the Cabernet is the first of the red wines, the third wine. That's with the St. George. And then the final wine pairing is the Shiraz, the Inception Shiraz, with the St. Barbara blue cheese. So a fascinating little lineup. And certainly we've seen sort of a few a few of these wines and cheese matches change over time. As I was saying, each vintage is different, so the wines look different and sometimes the cheeses look different.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
not every match is perfect. So that's also quite interesting as we go through to find maybe an imperfect match. But generally how we like to also taste is to taste the wine first, and I'll discuss the wine first and tell you a little bit about sort of what to expect with the flavours and characters. Take a small piece of cheese, make sure you've fully swallowed the cheese, and then have another sip of the wine. I find that you need the wine before and after to sort of cleanse the palate a little bit, and it helps cleanse the palate ready for the next cheese as well. So that's how we like to do it.
Yep.
After 10 sessions, we found that seems to work best. May not work best for you. It's different for everybody, as we all know. And your preferences in wine and cheese is different with everybody as well. So your palate may align with ours or may not. We'll see.
It's interesting to know what you think.
Yeah. So certainly use the chat room to let us know what you think as you're going as well. So I'll jump straight into it, Nardia, and we'll talk about the Chardonnay. So 2019 Chardonnay. What's really interesting to me about Chardonnay from Heathcote is there's only 2 or 3 others that actually do a Chardonnay. And you know, for me, so I had really, when I started making it, I had no sort of backlog of vintages and from different producers, and to really sort of study it and see what they were doing and what winemaking worked best. So really, what I decided to do early on is just to be completely natural and let the vineyard express itself as much as possible. So when I mean completely natural, the grapes are picked really early in the morning to keep them cold. Then they're put in the press and they're the whole bunches, pressed really gently straight to mostly old oak, French oak barrels. I do include a little bit of new oak, very little. And then it ferments naturally, so we don't add a cultured yeast. Most years I don't even have to add tartaric acid or anything like that to balance the wine. It's got enough natural acidity. So it's very old world winemaking in a sense, apart from the fancy airbag press. It probably would have gone into an old basket press, or before that even kind of foot stomped. That's going back a ways, and it's nice to have a nice little press to do the job perfectly for me. So really, what I end up achieving from that sort of winemaking style and fruit from Heathcote, as you can imagine, is going to be a bit more fruitful. So I tend to see a little bit more peach come through, a little bit kind of like the Beechworth Chardonnays that have got a bit more of that peach, a bit more kind of melon, slightly more tropical fruit spectrum, and just a little hint of French oak. So just that kind of little savoury edge to it. We've got it in our plum white B glasses, which has got quite a wide neck on it. Looks more like a Pinot Noir glass. And we find that really expresses it. We've got someone there who's got swirling in the right glass. Good to see. Right. It just expresses the wine. You really see a lot of the secondary characters, a lot of the winemaking characters, the lees, the oak, and that fruit really kind of jumps out of the glass as well. So thinking about that wine style, why don't you tell Nardia about the Bunning Mist?
Okay, the Mount Bunning Mist is a triple cream brie. It's made with milk from Jersey cows. Now we're in Ballarat, for those of you who don't know where we are. We get our milk from a Jersey farm, which is at Warring, which is about 40k south, down towards Colac. It's on the grey volcanic soils down there. So we get a really rich, creamy, luscious milk.
They're those little brown, smaller brown,
for those of you who don't know your Jersey breeds, the Jersey cows are the little brown cows with the big eyes, so they have a much higher butterfat content. Now, this cheese is a surface ripened cheese, like all bries or camemberts, so they ripen from the outside in. These cheeses are 5.5 weeks old now. They've got a really rich, buttery texture. Now, with the Jersey milk cheeses, it's more about the flavour of the milk. So the fat content sort of tones the moulds down, so more of your flavours coming from the milk, so it's rich, it's buttery, it's creamy. And you get a little bit more saltiness too, because the higher fat content sort of showcases the saltiness that you get with the cheese, which occurs during the brining process.
Nice. So like I was saying, this is the match that we have just done from the absolute beginning. We have never changed it. We would usually get together, 2 or 3 weeks prior to an event and sit down and taste, all of Nardia's cheeses with my full range of wines. And this is the one it never is wrong. It seems to be the right match every single time. So for those who have it, have a little swirl of the glass. Obviously a sniff, taking the aromas.
I get a really warm, almost toffee appley flavour initially, and then after it's gone, and you get all that really nice fruity.
Yeah, it's a lovely fruit. It's got a nice little dryness to it as well. And then obviously a little sample of the cheese. And that's a really lovely, rich but mild, brie, isn't it? It's got nice, really lovely texture. We've had these out for a while, so the cheese is quite melted now, and the Chardonnay is a little warmer. We actually find that helps too. If you've got a really cold Chardonnay and a room temperature cheese, there is a little bit of a clash there, and the Chardonnay needs to be, probably 15 or 16 degrees rather than 4 or 5 out of the fridge. I think that also helps quite a bit. There's a really lovely harmony between the cheese and the wine. You can go back and forth, and you don't lose the flavour of the wine. You don't lose the flavour of the cheese. I think that's what it's more about, and the experience then overall is more pleasurable. More enjoyable. Write a comment if you don't think it works. You can certainly write that too.
Well, actually, Janet gave me a really big scare because the starting of her comment is, "I really dislike Chardonnay." But if I keep going, it says, "But this one." Hang on, I can't even read it because it's. But this one is delightful, so fruity. So, Janet, even though you gave us a scare, you finished well. So.
I do hear that a lot actually when we say we've got a Chardonnay, because a lot, Chardonnay's, it's coming back slowly, but it's always a bit of a struggle to get people to try it. And a lot of people say, "Well, I just don't like Chardonnay," but they try my Chardonnay and they go, "Well, I like this." So I think it's because it's fruitier. It's not a dry, savoury style that you might get from a cooler climate, which are delightful, by themselves and make great food wines. But this is just a bit more of a fruit-forward, drink-now style of Chardonnay, which I think appeals as well.
Do you think Chardonnay might have been killed off by the over-oaking? Remember in the late 90s,
absolutely.
Everything was heavily oaked. And
and the introduction of things like Sauvignon Blanc, which kind of stole that market as well. And people got used to drinking much crisper, fruitier wines. So but it's slowly creeping back, and there's still the lovers of the big, rich, buttery Chardonnay. But this is definitely what I would call middle style. It's not that big, rich, buttery style, and it's not that really dry, savoury, cool climate style either. So.
And Brendan's made a comment here that he agrees with Janet that he's really enjoying your Chardonnay.
Good to hear. Thanks, guys.
And Janet's actually made a good point here too. She said, yes, it tastes better now than it did when we tasted it in the Facebook session.
Okay, there you go. Yep.
So your palate might have warmed up a little bit,
and the wine has aired a little bit. I think it helps a lot. Yep, because the wine looks a little less fruity too when it's been opened a little bit longer. So I think that's helpful as well. So.
And we can see the people on Instagram. Thank you so much. We can see you waving to us.
I know you're a sideline there this time around, but we'll get to you.
It's a bit of a practice run with Instagram tonight.
Yeah, so the Zoom guys that are wondering what I'm looking at an iPad on the side here that's doing Instagram so at the same time. So we're focused straight ahead tonight.
That's it. And so we also have a comment here from Dennis and Lorraine. They're wanting to know where they can buy the cheese in Bendigo.
Well, in Bendigo, you can get it from Bendigo Whole Foods, or if you come to the Good Loaf on a Thursday, you'll see me Thursday afternoon at the weekly farmers market. So that's where you can.
So be able to pick it up in Bendigo.
Come and see me in person.
Yeah, that's it. And Heather's talking about the difference between the wine before and after the cheese.
Yeah.
She actually is preferring the wine after the cheese. She said it's a really not the way that it's tasted. Obviously, she's really enjoyed it.
That's something we haven't talked about now, how the wine changes after.
Yeah, and we do find that in some pairings the wine is elevated after the cheese, and most wines are elevated with food. I think that goes without a doubt. But so I think when you've got a good harmony with the cheese, that you you're getting the full cheese experience, and you can, if the wine is lifted, then that's an absolute bonus. But just getting the pairing so they look good together and one doesn't clash with the other is where we start from, I think. So we can move on, I think, to the next one. So the Rosé, 2019 Sanguine Estate Rosé. I find Rosé an absolute fascinating wine to make from a winemaker's point of view. I know that, a lot of people don't think rosé is all that sophisticated, but a lot goes into it. Particularly now, we pick specific grapes for it, and even our Shiraz vineyard, we've got little pockets of vineyard which seem to suit rosé better, and we pick it way before it's ready to make normal, table wine, normal Shiraz. It's picked 2 or 3 weeks before that, and then just really gently pressed, a bit like the Chardonnay. We just press it really lightly. Straight to barrel and do natural fermentation. And with Shiraz, I'll pick, probably 3 or 4 different batches from around the vineyard, and that will always make up the predominant volume of wine in the rosé. But I've also got discovered that my Merlot makes particularly good rosé, so that's been, we've really utilised the Merlot almost 100% for rosé now. It makes a really lovely. It's quite opaque. It's got a slight pink colour to it when we press it. It doesn't release a lot of colour. It's got almost this pot puree aroma and like this earthy leafiness. So really good way of kind of bringing it down and making it a bit more savoury and dry. This particular one has predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon, about 20% Merlot, and then 5 to 10% Tempranillo Rosé. And I've also had Grenache is another one that I like to use for rosé. So I do change it every year, and it's for me that's the beauty of blending, is that you can balance the wine each year and make something a little bit different and unique. You're having those multiple varietals. So this is again a bit like the Chardonnay. There's with rosé, there's obviously what we know of rosé in the past has been pink in colour, quite sweet, very one-dimensional, fruity, uninteresting wine. And then there's been the big shift towards using grapes like Sangiovese and Pinot Noir, which make a really dry, lightly coloured, almost savoury rosé, which is great with food, can even age a little bit. And then there's this style, which is fruity but dry, so no residual sugar. It's naturally fermented in old French oak. So there's a bit more character going on there. It's not simple. There's a few more layers. There's a few more fruit descriptors. It's not just kind of strawberries. It's more, I guess, kind of cranberry and not peach. What was I thinking of? Cherry and a few other fruit descriptors, and a little bit of sort of a savoury edge to it, a slight sort of herbalness, which I quite like. So we've chosen the Warren Hip Ash to blend with that one, or to taste with that one. So would you like to give some more details? Maybe?
So the Warren Hip Ash, it's an ash-coated brie. Now this one is made with Frisian and Holstein milk. So again, for those of you who are not familiar with your dairy breeds, they're the big black and white cows with the long legs. If you look at the difference in the paste, so the inner part of the cheese, from the Warren Hip Ash to the Mount Buninyong Mist, you'll see that there's a real colour difference, and that's due to the different breeds of the dairy animal. Now the farm where we get our Frisian milk from is just north of Ballarat. It's on the red volcanic soils. Again, really green, really lush pastures, really beautiful milk grapes. It makes a great cheese. Now we also make an unashed version, and originally we made it because I just love the look of it. I did it for aesthetic reasons. I love it. You open it, it's white, and then you cut into it, you've got the layer of the black, and then you've got the creamy yellow of the paste. But what it also does is it changes the flavour of the cheese. So if you taste the Warren Hip White next to the Warren Hip Ash, they actually taste quite different, even though it's the same batch. It can even be the same batch of cheese. So what it does to the flavour, it's really complex, and I can't explain why it changes the flavour, but it also changes the texture as well. It gives you a softer, creamier cheese than the Warren Hip White, and that is just completely a chemistry reaction, because when you make cheese, you start off with milk and neutral pH, then you add your cultures, and that produces an acid, lactic acid, so it drops down to quite acidic, so not quite as acidic as yogurt, but getting towards there, sort of about 5.2. And then as the cheese ripens, that lactic acid gets broken down. And as the cheese ripens with less lactic acid, the pH rises. The more it rises, the softer the cheese becomes. So when you put ash on the outside, which is quite alkaline, excuse me, causes the pH to rise more and gives you a softer cheese. So the ash is actually probably one of our most popular cheese. It's a vegetable ash that we put on the outside. Now originally ash would have been put on because it's a really good preserving agent and it's supposed to keep the flies off. And if you look around at your home tonight, you've got no flies, it's working.
There you go. That's fascinating.
So yeah.
Yeah. So let's have a little,
Yeah.
a little swirl of the wine and taste of the wine.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a comment here. I don't know if you've seen this. I had to just drop out, but it said, at some stage, could Nardia please talk through the Jersey difference again, please? Creaminess, salt. She's made those comments there.
Yep. So the Jersey milk naturally has a higher butterfat content. So you may remember your mother or someone talking about the cream layer on the top. With Jersey milk, you get a lot more cream than you do with Friesian cattle. Most farmers will have Friesian cows because Friesians produce a greater volume of milk, where Jerseys produce a smaller volume, but they've got a bit more protein and a bit more fat in it. And things that are fattier tend to taste saltier to you than those that are less salty. So that's why the Jersey actually tastes saltier than the Friesian cheeses. So the Warren Hip Ash won't taste as salty as the Jersey, although they've got the same amount of salt in it. It's just the creaminess, the fattiness of the Mount Buninyong that makes it taste a little saltier.
Great.
I hope that answered the question?
Yeah. So we've always had the rosé in this position for the 5 years of doing the sessions, but we haven't always had the same wine, the same cheese, because we found the rosé has changed quite a bit, and we've needed to really alter the cheese. The last couple of years we had the Gold Sovereign, which is my favourite cheese from Goldfields Cheese. It's a bit more in that kind of, it looks a bit more like a French brie or camembert. It's much more like like you said, farmyardy.
Much more farmy, very funky cheese. We actually wanted
funky,
it to taste more like a French cheese. So if you've had French cheeses, you know they're a lot more farmyardy, funky, got a lot more punch to them. So we make it like that.
And what we found about that was really because I wanted to include that cheese more than anything. And what we found that with the rosé, it wasn't offensive. They didn't really pair beautifully, but you could go comfortably back and forth and enjoy the experience of both. But it was such a flavoured, funky cheese that
it completely dominated the Chardonnay and was hopeless with the reds. And
we kind of questioned and we've tried with the Gold Sovereign to match it to the reds, but it just doesn't seem to work. So that really kind of funky, savoury, more full-on flavoured French cheese isn't really actually quite a difficult one to pair. We would have to do a lot more work and maybe have some more savoury reds or something that we work with on that one, or even more savoury whites. But an interesting experiment that I did earlier on was, just so you know we're not just making this up, is to try the second wine with the first cheese. So the rosé with the Buninyong mist, what we noticed straight away is that you lose quite a lot of impact of the wine on the palate. So you really can't taste the rosé with that cheese, but it didn't seem to have that effect on the Chardonnay. In fact, there were comments that it lifted the Chardonnay. So you can really clearly see, just doing that experiment, that there are matches that work and matches that really don't. It's a good experiment because it'll sort of helps train the palate a little bit and see what we're looking at. So interesting to get some comments up there if it's not just me who sees that, or whether anyone else can see that difference if they start mixing and matching the cheese and the wine.
Well, we are getting some comments here, so let me just do a bit of a run through them.
20 seconds behind. Oh no, Zoom's live, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you're all. Yeah, no, that's it.
So I'm used to Facebook. There's a 20-second delay, so I know this is live.
So Rob was saying that he agrees that he's just loving the rosé. I've had a few comments about how delicious the rosé is.
Thanks, guys.
And love the match of the rosé with the ash cheese pairing.
Yeah.
The Warren Heap. Thank you. The Warren Heap ash is amazing.
Yeah,
so
it's
it's our most popular cheese.
Yeah, getting a thumbs up there. Brendan has confirmed that there are no flies there.
It's working.
And Carolyn's got a great comment here. She said, "Thank you for the Jersey recap. Fascinating. The rosé ash combo has a completely different texture to the Bunnyong Chardonnay.
Yeah, it does.
Combo.
It's a very different combination.
Kind of coats the roof of your mouth. Is that the wine or the cheese causing that?"
Definitely the cheese.
That's the cheese.
Yeah,
Yep.
the cheese.
Yep.
I thought it would be fat content, but after the Jersey recap, it seems the Warren Heat would be lower fat.
Correct.
Yeah, and it's just really the flavours of the rosé not quite cutting through the fatness of the cheese as much. And that's why we find you've got to be careful and have a fairly elegant, lightly flavoured cheese with the rosé. It doesn't like having a too full of flavoured cheese.
Yeah.
And that's why the Bunnyong Mist just doesn't work with the rosé.
Yeah, and Rob's confirming that. He said that he totally agrees. The first cheese combined with the rosé really removes the flavour from the rosé.
From the rosé. So that's the clear, incorrect match.
And Carolyn's made a comment that the Chardonnay combo worked better for both, but the rosé really brought out the Warren Height more than the rosé.
Yep.
Yeah, you could easily eat the Warren Heat bashed with the Chardonnay.
With the Chardonnay as well. Yep. But the slightly more full flavoured Bunnyong, I think, goes with a full flavoured Chardonnay. I think it works the best out of those. Okay, so our third food, cheese and wine pairing is the 2018 Cabernet blend.
Sorry, I have to.
Jody's got some amusing questions coming in.
I'm laughing. Heather's just written in to say our cat just stole the Bunnyong mist off my plate. I had to go and get more from the kitchen. I think she approves it. Approves it too.
Normally it's dogs. Dogs
love cheese, don't they? My dog's mad for cheese. Great. So the 2018 Cabernets. So we've only ever made one straight Cabernet wine, and that was in 2017. The Cabernet just looked amazing on its own, was perfectly balanced and ready to go. So we didn't blend it, but every other year we've blended it with a different combination of Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot and Merlot. They're classic Bordeaux varietals that are blended with Cabernet. And what I find fascinating with blending a Cabernet, I find it's something that you have to do, particularly if you want it to present well as a young wine as well as age well. You've got to get that balance, and I find that with Heathcote Cabernet in particular, it's got quite a lot of tannin and it's quite intense, whereas something like Cabernet Franc is very dry, light, fruity. It's kind of in that dried herbs, cherry combination, sort of smoked cherry. Then you've got Petit Verdot, which is really bright, loads of acid, more like violets and florals and bright berry characters. And then obviously your Merlot, which we pick later for this, is all about texture. It's quite round and soft and plummy, so it fills out the middle. So I find having those four varieties, a little bit like the rosé really, it's fascinating sitting there having all these little different things that you can fine tweak the wine with. It just makes for a fascinating blending session, and hopefully you like this wine and it's balanced just right for you as an early drinking wine. So this year normally we would actually have the Tempranillo. Well, the last few sessions we've had the Tempranillo in here with the hard goats. But the hard goat cheese wasn't available, so we've got it with the Cabernet with the St. George. So Nardia, can you explain the St. George for us?
Yep, so the St. George is a hard cheese. It's a Tom style cheese. So like your Gruyere, Comte, those style of cheeses, it's made in the same vein as those. We mature them for between 6 to 9 months. I myself prefer them when they get to about 9 months. At the moment, this one's about 6 months old. I've also had a bit of white mould on the outside rind of this cheese, which I found gives the cheese a really good flavour. Yeah. And people ask me if you can eat the rind. Yes, you can. We keep our hard cheeses in the same room as our blue veins. So there'll be a mix of blue mould and white mould on the rind, but the inner texture of the cheese it's firm without being too hard. It's nice and smooth on the palate. It's nutty, it's savoury, and I find even the texture of the cheese complements the wine really, really nicely.
Yeah, and that's a lovely harmony because that's a relatively soft Cabernet. We've had this open for a couple of hours now, and it's come to room temperature, so it even looks better than it did when we first opened it. When we first opened it, it was quite cold and looked a bit more edgy and a bit more tannic, and there was a slight clash. But now that wine has opened up and is looking softer and fruitier, that's a really lovely match with that cheese. And I feel that St. George would probably go with most medium-bodied fruity reds. I think you'd be pretty good with even like the Tempranillo, Nebbiolo, even Pinot Noir would be fine. Particularly with the Rhine. The Rhine, I like tasting it with the Rhine. It gives it that extra little bit of a kick of flavour, and that goes goes better with the wine. So.
See, I don't like to taste it with the Rhine because the Rhine just reminds me of what the maturing room smells like. So every time I taste it, I'm right back in the maturing room and I'm at work.
Yeah, it's a bit like an oak barrel for me.
Yeah.
It's a distraction from what you really want to taste.
Yeah.
You want to taste how the core has gone.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we're getting some more cat comments. So we've...
the animals sniffing around, are they?
Yeah, they are. So someone else, Shannon, lost some of her cheese to the cat. So if anyone's got a cat, if you want to actually go and put the cat outside or hide in a room, now's the time to do that. Or as Janet suggested, get a dog.
Yes, I'm going to add that to my byline. 9 out of 10 cats approve.
And Rob has just said, just confirmed, our cat isn't getting close to any of this cheese. Carolyn, so pleased that you're liking the placemats. I think that would be handy to have that so you can refer to the cheese names and the wines.
Yeah.
And this is so creamy for a hard cheese. Extraordinary was Carolyn's comment.
Yeah, it's got a lovely texture, and I think that's why I like it with that with that wine.
And I'm surprised it is so creamy because this was made back in December. So we had a pretty cool in our region. Unlike a lot of our regions, was pretty cool, and we had quite a bit of rain. Normally, I would have expected the cheese to be quite hard.
Do you expect it to be flaky? Or?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah. Would expect it to be a lot more flaky than it is. But I've also improved my maturation process. Not letting them dry out so much as well.
Okay.
Not getting so dry. I've fixed it by getting a $1 drop sheet from Bunnings and putting that over the shelving just to increase the humidity around the cheeses.
There you go. Okay, anyone else want to comment on the Cabernet blend? We can move on. We can go back and forth as well. So the final wine and cheese match that we have is the 2017 Inception Shiraz from Sanguine with the St. Barbara. This Shiraz is different to what we would normally use in the sense that the 2017 was a cooler year. So the wine has a bit more of a medium-bodied. It has drier tannins. It has more sort of herbal notes. It's still quite fruity, but not as maybe big and rich as some of our previous vintages. I really love this vintage for that reason. I love that kind of elegance and spiciness that it has. We've paired that with a blue cheese, but it's a rather mild blue cheese. And I noticed when Nardia and I first began, our both pet hate was Shiraz with a blue cheese. We both thought really early on that they just banged their heads. They were just too different. So the very first year, Nardia made a stronger blue, a Welshman's Reef, she called it. Oh, she still has that.
Yeah, we just still have it.
Yeah.
It's a Stilton.
A Stilton style blue vein cheese. And what we found that we ended up having to get a Tokay, a really sweet Tokay, to match with that, or even like a port, something that's got quite a lot of power and sweetness you need for a really strong blue. But this is quite a different blue. Nardia, do you want to describe why it's different?
All right, so this is a waxed blue vein. So we mature this for a couple of months, then we wax it, and then we keep maturing it. And what the waxing does is it changes the amount of oxygen going into the cheese. So it then gives the cheese a more cheddary flavour. So for those of you who are not so into blue vein, usually a really good cheese to start with because when you first taste it, you get those sweet, nutty, cheddary flavours that you get with mature cheddar. Then you'll get the blue vein flavour in the aftertaste. And again, this one's made with the milk with the Jersey milk. So the Jersey milk cuts through some of the harshness in the blue vein. And yeah, so it's a good beginner cheese.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I was one of those when I started. I seem to have a sensitivity to the ammonia that comes off so much, blue vein cheese, so much bacteria in the blue vein. And I find it sort of almost gets trapped in my senses and it's all I can smell and taste even when I try and taste the wine. But I find that this is a bit milder and I find that after I've tasted it a few times, I don't get that same problem and you can taste the cheese and taste the wine. Now I think, let's have a little taste of the wine and the cheese together and we'll see what you think. You're probably all well ahead of me and have tried this a few times already.
So while you're having a bit of a taste there, I'm very amused by the comments in the background. Our video quality is so poor that I keep thinking we're having wine talks with Matt Moran. You get that a lot, don't you?
I do get that.
Yeah, Mark gets that a fair bit. And Brendan agrees. We love you, Matt. Shannon's having so much trouble with her cat's completely out of control, so she might need to leave us. But yeah, she's looking forward to heading to a cheese to Chuka. So, do you go to a Chuka at all, to the markets up there?
No, I don't. No, I'm sorry. You'll have to come down to Bendigo.
Yeah, there you go. So, yeah, that's right, man. Nardia, actually, did we say that we're at the markets with Zoom, or was that with Facebook?
Oh, no, it was here.
It was with Zoom, yeah, okay. Yeah. So, yeah, catch Nardia in the Bendigo markets.
Mm.
So, usually when we're doing this particular blend, we've had, obviously, prior to 2017, for about 4 or 5 years, we had much warmer years, so the wines were a little richer and fuller and more fruity. And I think that you've also mentioned that there's a bit more blue in this than there normally would be as well.
This one's veined a little bit more than usual. So.
Yeah, so we've got a slightly more veiny cheese and a more savoury, medium-bodied Shiraz. And suddenly I can see the slight discourse there, the fact that it's not perfect. I still actually find it enjoyable. I'm actually just nitpicking a little bit here, and I see that it's not the same harmony as it would be if it was a richer wine and a slightly less blue cheese. In our first session, we got a lot of people saying love that final blend, and I think it's flavour on flavour, and it fills the mouth, and it's really enjoyable just for that reason. But if you're sort of really nitpicking and wanting to get something perfect, I think the cheese does overpower that wine a little bit.
Yeah. How does it go with the Cabernet?
Oh, we haven't tried that.
Yeah, well, we haven't tried it with the other red, so it's worth trying the blue with the Cabernet to see if it has that same effect, because the Cabernet is a bit, I guess, softer and slightly more lush.
No, it doesn't work for me.
So I wonder how the St. George goes with the Shiraz.
So they're just doing a bit of a mixing and matching between cheeses and red wines at the moment. While they're doing that,
it's very similar, I think. It's just the aftertaste is the cheese.
Yeah, it brings out more of the astringency in the blue.
Yeah, yeah, because exactly what you said. The blue finishes, I think, more tart almost and astringent than it does without the wine.
So that's the Cabernet matched with the blue.
Yeah, it doesn't quite work.
It doesn't quite work.
I think you'll find that the St. George, though, works. So the third cheese, the cheese that was matched with the Cabernet, will also work really well with the Shiraz. So it's worth having a look at that as well.
Yeah.
So third cheese with the fourth wine.
So some of the comments we have are that the St. Barbara matches beautifully with the Inception, so delicious, enjoying that. The reds are beautiful, love the blue as well. I think my favourite is the first couple of pairings.
Yeah, there's good harmony in the first couple of pairings.
I think the St. Barbara goes alright with the Chardonnay.
The St. Barbara with the Chardonnay, okay.
Oh wow.
I never would have thought.
That's an interesting one. Well, there's one, the very last cheese with the first wine, the Chardonnay. worth having a look at that. This is, you know, an experiment that you can also do in front of you if you have them, just to chop and change and go between.
I think the acidity of the Chardonnay
It goes okay
cuts
with
through
it. Yeah, okay.
for me.
So while you're doing that, how old is this cheese? Are we talking about the blue maybe? Mark, if you wanted to clarify the cheese, we'll talk about the blue, but if it's not the blue, let us know.
The blue cheese is 2.5 months old.
Great. So I alluded early on, Nardia, that there's a symmetry between winemaking and cheese making, and that's in the sense that we've got this raw product that we both have to work with, and how much kind of climate and environment impacts that. Can you explain how the environment affects your flavours of your cheese?
It's not more so much the flavours; it's more the texture of the cheese.
Okay.
So it depends on the ratio of protein and fat within the milk. So this time of the year, when we've had a bit of rain and the pastures are really nice and lush, there's good fat content in relation to the protein, so it gives you a nice, soft, supple cheese, particularly with the soft cheeses. Gives you that beautiful flowing texture. When the pastures are a bit drier, the fat content drops, and you tend to get a firmer cheese. You don't have that nice ooze. So to try and counterbalance that, I'll try and manipulate the rate at which the starter cultures in the cheese are producing lactic acid. If I can slow it down, I can manage to make a slightly softer cheese in the summertime than perhaps I might if the milk acidifies a little bit too quickly. And that's really the only option I've got. I won't know until the cheeses come out of the maturing room, you know, whether or not they're going to be nice and soft, or whether they're going to be firm.
Yeah, okay.
So it's really, because we don't, although both my husband and myself who make the cheese, we both have science backgrounds, but we try not to over science the cheese making, so sort of we try and guide the milk rather than manipulate the milk.
It's another symmetry there with winemaking. It's a bit the same. You have this raw ingredient. It is affected by the environment, and my job is just to guide it and steer it rather than try and manipulate it too much.
Do no harm.
Do no harm, exactly. Yeah, not stuff it up. Yeah, that's right.
So we are getting quite a few comments through.
Oh, great, okay.
So Michael, he thinks the cheese is really nice, but it overpowers the wine. We're talking about the blue with the inception.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there's just out of whack a little bit.
And yes, Carolyn agrees, thinks that the blue is too strong for the Shiraz, probably better suited to a dessert wine is where she's heading. Same with Janet Munro, same comment. We're getting St Barbara needs a bolder wine. The Cabernet with the St George is my favourite.
Yep. Nice.
Michael prefers the St George, thinks that the St George works better with the inception.
I think most of it's in ingredients. You know, there's still... and there'll be a few comments about, you know, that being the last two being a good combination. We had quite a few suggesting that earlier on, and of course this is all very subjective. And if you eat a lot of blue cheese too, you find the flavours won't impact your palate as much as some other people do. I don't drink a lot of blue, so I find it kind of overpowers my senses in a way. Whereas if you're eating blue all the time, then your threshold for some of these characters might be less, and it looked like a better pairing.
So blue is my preferred cheese.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's some really great comments here. The blue is lovely, but the ammonia sits too long after to make us want to match with anything other than a dessert wine. So that's fair comments.
Dessert wine and blue cheese is my preferred
that's and as we've said, what I suggested first is a slightly richer wine and the previous what's it called again, the St Barbara has been less of the blue vein running through it, so and more cheddary, so there was a better combination there. So these things, as we've said, because we're both very small producers, our wines and our cheese are at the whims of nature, and they change, not dramatically, but they change enough each season that we have to constantly adjust, and we always will try and meet prior to doing this tasting and play with different cheese and wine matches to get it right. but as I said, the Chardonnay and the Bourguignon Mist has been the one absolute stayer. So I think we've sort of, I guess, come to a rough consensus that the soft cheeses tend to go better with the whites, rosés, and the firmer cheeses, the more full flavoured cheeses, tend to go better with the reds. That if you want to throw a broad brush at it, at a generalisation, that's what we've sort of come across ourselves, because we had no experience going into this 4 years ago, and I don't think we had really any strong preconceived ideas either about what was a perfect cheese and wine pairing. So we really both started from scratch when we started. We didn't have years of doing it prior. So it's been a really interesting
and each year we do it, we match them quicker. Like that first year, it took us a couple of hours to do it. And I think last year when we did it, was over in 45 minutes.
Because we know just what doesn't work too. So we don't waste our time on what just doesn't work.
Well, we're still getting some great comments through. So Rob, we actually like the Chardonnay with the blue more than the Shiraz.
That was interesting.
Then we've got Dennis, Dennis and Lorraine, who is saying that our table thinks the Inception matches perfectly with the cheese. The Inception is one of our favourite wines from Sanguine. In fact, we love all Sanguine wines. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Lorraine and Dennis. That's so lovely. And this is a great question from Carolyn that's been dittoed by Janet, and that is, could you please tell us how each of you got into your trades, please?
Oh, you go first.
My father sucked me in, actually. He was very clever in the early days. In my early 20s, I liked wine, but I wasn't really into it. Or late teens, early 20s, And my father bought this little property, and which was just a bare paddocks and had sheep and cattle running around it. I helped him on weekends put the vineyard in, and he would drag me along to wine tastings, and so he got me sort of interested in that sense. But then he really got me interested when he offered my sister and I a 10-acre vineyard to plant our own vineyard on. So we then had this kind of financial and emotional connection to the property. Really within 2 years of planting that vineyard and having a few vintages, I was working there full time. I went off and did viticulture. So that's my main studies has been involved in viticulture. And really as a vigneron, someone who has his own vineyard and makes his own wine, that's the critical knowledge is the viticulture. You've got to get that right first. So that was my main training. And then I worked with a few different winemakers, following my fruit to a couple of different wineries in the early days. And that was fascinating because I worked with a really, what I would describe as an artisan winemaker, someone who, makes the wine completely natural, no additions, not very sterile, clean, just really old world kind of stuff. And then I worked with another winemaker who was actually Dean of Mathematics at Melbourne, I think it was Melbourne University. So he followed the, winemaking to the absolute book. It was the most sterile, clean winemaking you've ever seen. So I actually worked with two extremes on my fruit and got to see, how all that went. So I got, a hell of a lot of great information from working with those winemakers, and then ended up deciding to do a vintage on my own in 2005. So that's where it all started for me, sort of my winemaking experience. So learned a hell of a lot very quickly, particularly when you're doing your own fruit. And luckily we had lots of fruit coming in from the vineyard that I could experiment and really get a good handle on what works, particularly with working with other winemakers as well. So that's my introduction into the wine industry. So it wasn't meant to happen, and just sort of organically, slowly progressed, and I absolutely could not imagine what else I'd be doing with my life. There's just nothing else I'd want to do. It's a fascinating career that throws up challenges every year. It's science, it's art, it's it's everything. It's a wonderful career, and it's a real thrill. Nadia, how did you?
And I, like Mark, I love the science and the art. I have a PhD in microbiology. After 10 years working at universities, I said to my husband, I've had enough of this. I don't want to do it anymore. And he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I love microbiology and I love food. So I want to do something that was, that combined the two. So I thought, well, I could be a cheesemaker, a brewer, or a vigneron. We didn't have any money to buy a winery. And I found a one-day cheese-making course coming up in 6 weeks' time. And I rang up and there was one spot left and booked in and went, we happened to be a blue cheese making class, which I love. And I went along and came home and said to him, this is it, this is what I want to do. And I've heard of other cheesemakers that have had, epiphanies on the side of the road in France that they want to become cheesemakers. And I had mine in the Emily McPherson building at RMIT. So we can't all choose where we have that. So
Right.
That was in 2002. So I spent the next couple of years learning how to make cheese because there's no formal education for making cheese here in Australia. And I just I was about to have a small child. So I did a few cheese making classes, learnt the basics, then did a course on there's quite a lot of red tape involved in the dairy industry. So I did a short course on getting through all the regulations and everything. Then while I was at home with my first child, I was supposed to be doing all my business plan and doing all that stuff, which I found intensely boring. And by that stage, we'd found a farmer who was going to supply us with milk. So I was spending all my time, if I wasn't with the baby, I was making cheese in the kitchen. Then towards the end of 2004, I started to feel a bit sick and a bit tired, and I thought, I've been here before, and sure enough, baby number 2 was coming along. So my husband and I looked at each other and went, oh my God, parents of 2 children, if we don't do this now, we're never going to do it. So he chucked in his job. He's got a background in food technology. He's a research and development, so he's a food chemist. So he chucked in his job, and within a month the business plan was done, the loans were in place, the equipment was ordered. The plan was that the pasteuriser, we've got a 300 litre batch pasteuriser that came from Belgium. It was supposed to arrive in the May, and then the baby would arrive at the end of August, and we'd just keep going. Unfortunately, the baby and the pasteuriser arrived in the same week at the end of August. So 5 days after I came out of hospital with baby number 2, we had our first inspection with Dairy Food Safety Victoria, who's the governing body of all dairy manufacturers in the state of Victoria. 2 weeks later, we had our second and final inspection, and 2 weeks after that, we made our first batch of cheese on the 6th of October 2005 with an 18-month-old and a 1-month-old baby.
Wow.
And we've been making cheese ever since.
Well,
I love it. There's nothing else I'd rather do.
I know, I get the same. And thankfully, it all worked out for you because we have these
That's right.
wonderful cheeses to try here tonight. So they've been excellent. Thank you so much for bringing these cheeses along.
Thank you for the wine. It's been wonderful. So I really look
It's always fun.
forward to this every year.
It's one of our favourite things to do all year is the cheese and wine pairing. It's so easy to do and enjoyable and fun to talk about.
Yeah.
And look, there are so many wonderful comments here. I'm very conscious that we are getting quite late in the night. I'll just quickly...
We can just keep going forever, guys.
We could, I know. And these comments are fantastic. So, Carolyn said there was a bit of dissent at their table about the cheese matching, which I think is fantastic because that gets
it's
discussion
it's very subjective, and it's... it depends on preferences and how your palates have been trained all your lives.
There's certainly she's been loving the St George and the rind, a distinct musty grassy flavour. So
it does.
Quite enjoying that. Tony's saying likes both hard cheeses with the Cabernet. I think you might have probably moved on, Tony, to the Shiraz now. He did say that he hadn't had the Shiraz yet, but I'm sure that he would have by now. Dennis is wanting to know whether they can buy the cheese online.
You can. But it's probably easier to ring us, that way we can tell you what's ripe now, because not everything's ripe all the time. So.
Then we've got Rani said that she's loved them all. We love the Cabernet best, and for the cheese we love the Mount Benignon. Really like the Inception with the St George. This is from Carolyn. The wine dominates the cheese, but the textures work well. and the what you call aftertaste is balanced well. What else do we have? Brendan would have loved a cheese closer to a cheddar with the Cabernet.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe next year.
Maybe next time.
Yeah. So we can work on that. Dennis loves our wines.
Good on you,
Thanks,
Dennis.
Based on what Nardia has said, I'd like to hear her suggestions of what time of year is best to buy the different cheeses.
It really depends on the cheese. My recommendation is to always buy your cheeses from somewhere where you can taste it, which unfortunately during this virus time you're actually not able to, people can't offer any tastings, but just because you like the time of the year and a whole lot of other conditions are going to vary with the cheese and the age of the cheese as well. So it's always good to taste it because you might like a cheese when it's a particular age and not like it when it's younger or older. So always buy where you can taste it. Just buy enough for the time being, just for the next week or two, and then buy more. There's no point if you buy a whole big piece of cheese, because cheese is a living thing, it's going to keep changing. So buy small amounts and often rather than big amounts and infrequently would be my top advice.
Fabulous. So we're getting lots of thank you very muches. Really loved the session tonight. They're probably thinking that maybe they split the session into two so that they can have a bit of a rest in between. Because I think there's a lot to digest there and to enjoy. So we'll certainly take that feedback. That feedback on. I'm just going to come back into screen while we sort of finish up. It's been a long session. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining us in our Zoom session. If there are any other questions, and thank you so much on Instagram as well.
Forget about you guys.
That's it. It's our first little trial with Instagram going, so we thought we'd do it as part of this class. So if there are any other little questions there, I will make sure that I get those across to Nardia and not Matt Moran, it's Mark Hunter.
Yeah.
So thank you everybody, really appreciate, we're getting some claps and some cheers. Thank you, and we'll see you all again soon. Next week we have our Italian, Mark's favourite varieties, Italian varieties. There's 4 of them, fantastic wines that Mark has chosen. You can buy the wine for that class next week where he's joined by Peter Johns, and we'll do a Facebook Live session followed by Zoom on those particular wines. So if you want to step outside your comfort zone and try something new, there's a Lagrange, a Nebbiolo, a Prosecco, and starts with S.
Suave, Garganega is the variety. So some very interesting wines that you won't see in many retail outlets. He mainly sells to restaurants, so a really awesome selection. And Peter Johns, who's going to be working with me on the wines, he knows the producers in and out. He goes to Italy every year and spends time with the families and the producers, so he's got a really great insight into the wines. So definitely worthwhile getting on to that pack if you can.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Nardia, for joining us.
Thanks, mate.
Yeah, really loved it. And thank you to everybody on Facebook, Instagram, and also there on Zoom. Thank you.
Thank you,
You
guys.
can unmute yourself and say goodbye if you wish.
Thank you, amazing.
No worries, guys. Thank
Bye,
you.
thanks.
Bye-bye.